This is a tutorial for the node PPG transform in PPG 2.0 for Bifrost. Transform is a very powerful node, so I will show a few examples explaining the possibilities that you can do with these nodes. I have a very simple case here, some randomly selected faces, and I want to cut some window-like structures into it. And these windows are not completely symmetrical, so I need to have a transform node to, create these asymmetries. So first thing I'm going to do here is to say I need a PPG extrude node, and I'm going to use whatever this thing here produces. Let's say it says, it calls these faces X, and let me turn on the labels. So we have these faces simply marked with an X. So in the extrude node, I will say, hey, all the faces that are called X, simply I want to extrude. And first of all, not an outward extrude at the first time, but just, an inwards extrude to create some sort of a frame. And it starts already here. We can only do this offset in a uniform manner, so it has the same offset from all four sides, so there is no way to make this irregular. Also, I should take care of the names of the nodes here, so we'll call this EXF, for example, and the other ones simply are the sides, because I want to keep those separate. So EXF, that's going to be my window here, and now I will already use a PPG transform node and make these faces irregular. So the name is EXF here, and you see as soon as I type in the name of the faces that I want to modify, it shows little pivots on these objects. So down here in the settings, I can make the pivots a little bit smaller, just so that you see what the coordinate system is on these faces. So I could say, so there are various ways that I could do. So currently the transform mode is faces. It would transform the complete face. I could also set it to selected edges. Then the pivot, jumps down here to the selected edge. Let me make this also a little bit thinner here. So this is the selected edge with a red arrow, and I could now say, hey, let's scale this selected edge. So I can make it irregular like this already. I can also, move the pivot around. So the pivot on this edge here goes from 0 to 1. So I can move the pivot around. When I set it to 0.5, it will sit exactly in the middle. So now when I scale it, it's a little bit more symmetrical for, if I wanted to have such an asymmetrical window here. And also, it's the same thing for the selected faces. When I do the whole face, I can also say, hey, I want the pivot in the center, which is this setting here, pivot in the center. And you see, when you change the modes, this other setting disappears. So pivots on the faces, I can say it's in the center. And if it's not in the center, it must be somewhere on these edges here. Right? And these edges, in this case, it goes from 0 all the way to 4 and stops there because it has 4 edges. I can change the setting in the future because I'm not sure if this is going to be the ultimate method here, but at least you can be sure 0.5 is in the middle of the first edge. And then we say it's 1, it's 2, it's 2.5 would be in the middle of the opposite edge. So 2.5 would be up here. So I could scale the whole thing from up here. A Z scaling would be this one here, and an X scaling would be this one here. Right? So this way I can already say, hey, I want to have this much slimmer in this direction and a bit wider in that direction, but it would be much better to have the whole thing, the pivot in the center, just ramp up this pivot in center to 1. So now the pivot is in the center and we are safe. We can scale it horizontally and also vertically and go a little bit up with that. Right? So the next step, or the next 3 steps, are some extrudes. So let me skip over that, not waste time here. So this is what we have right now after the 3 extrude nodes. that we have. I extruded it a little bit outwards. Let me turn off the diagnostic display here so we can see a little bit better. So I extruded the window or this one frame here a little bit outward, then made an offset and then extruded it inward so that we have now some sort of a window. So the first one was a little bit slim, so I increased the horizontal size, and also, you know, the scaling along the x-axis was a bit too drastic, because I want to do now here is to use the last extrude and also say we make some sort of an offset, make it smaller inside. But now I want to move this window here, this last window, a little bit upwards. So maybe not so deep, the whole thing. I want to move it a little bit upward. Actually, I want it vertically smaller and then move upward so that we have like a 45 angle degree down on this one here, and it's flat on this face here. So I use another PPG transform and I select the node which is EXF. So I call them all the same, EXF, and here you see the coordinate system again, and then we can turn off the diagnostic display. So now I would make it vertically a little bit smaller and then move it up. So now we have this tilted angle here on the downside of the window. So maybe it's too much, but you get the idea, you know, that's exactly what I wanted. So not move it not so much up here, very much like this. So this is the thing that I've seen in reality, and I wanted to mimic this window here with my transform node. So that is one use of the transform node. We are basically working on faces and sometimes maybe on a selected edge. But what's with the face tag groups? There's a special way to use this option, and I came across this possibility or necessity to do that with a special problem that I had. So first what I'm going to do is to give it a new face tag. So all of these nodes or all of these groups here, faces that I have, which are called EXS, which are the extrude sides, and the EXF, which is the final face of the extrude, I give them new names and I call it GRP, like so. I can rename that later, but you know, in order now to randomize this, for example, if I wanted to rotate them randomly or scale them randomly, I would have to group them somehow. So I would have to group these windows into individual window groups. And this is really tough, you know, especially procedurally. Even if you do it by hand, you would have to select all these groups and say it has a different name from the rest. So how do we do it here? There is a special workflow here with the node getFaceInfo. And this getFaceInfo node is kind of a monster. Look at this here. So getFaceInfo, and actually we only want to get the info of GRP, the group nodes. And what this thing does here is it delivers me information about all of the faces that I have selected here. So GRP, that's the name of the nodes, and not the sides here, not the gray ones. So I've selected all the green windows here. And how do I group them now? So what we have here is information about these faces. So we have all the IDs in the same order. We have, for example, the face centers. So we have the centers of all of these faces that belong to this window here. So let's try and order them by that. There's a node called cluster values that I wrote that is used for the IDs. So I want to cluster these IDs or put them into groups. And a cluster value could not be the complete face center. That's maybe a little bit too much. Even though maybe I try it. It's not. It's trying. It wants a scalar value here. So to use the whole face center doesn't make or the whole XYZ triple doesn't make any sense here. So we use a vector to scalar node to split it up into XYZ, this face center here, and just group them in the first go, group them in the Y direction. So, and once I've grouped them, now we have a two-dimensional array coming out of this one here, and I will use the node pattern rename. So I use the node pattern rename with the object, and I rename all of these objects automatically. So these groups here, so this is now a two-dimensional array with groups of objects that have the same Y level. So we first turn it into different Y levels, and here we can say, so let me put that into this one here, and you see already what happens here. So we have different colors. We need to adjust the tolerance, so it needs some tolerance so that the upper and lower ones are also grouped, and so like this one here, when we increase the grouping here. Yeah, so we can look, we can see down here, so all the A's should be in one group. So now we have all the ones in the lowest level, that's one group. So we have group A, B, and C. And A, B, and C are these names here from this first one, and it's inheriting the source tag. So let's leave it like that. And we can do this now another time. So we copy the whole construction here and put it in again. So, but this time I'm going to use the X direction as a cluster value. And I also, I remove these completely, the names completely. So now it's going to produce me some automatic numbering. So when there's no name given, then it produces automatic numbering. So this case, I take the same ones again, and now it's already, so here we have a problem. So we probably need to decrease the tolerance a little bit. So here we go. Oh, that's already it. So now you see that all of these things, group A is the lowest row here, and we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 4. Is there a 3 somewhere? No. And then we have group B, and then we have group C up here. So all of these objects now have unique names, and now I can now go and say, let's use another PPG transform and say I want all that are named group GRP with a wildcard, and turn off the diagnostic display, because now I want to say I want the face tag groups, and I can turn on the pivots again, and you see that it creates only one pivot for each group. So this is the faces and this is the groups. This transform node automatically analyzes the group and the names and finds groups of these names and says, okay, I want to transform these all together. So what we could do, simply say, hey, let's make a Z rotation, for example, to rotate them all sideways to see, yeah, these are all groups and they're all independent from each other. This is a bit lame here, this construction of manually dialing some numbers. So what about some random numbers? Unfortunately, PPG transform has no random setting here. So whatever we do is one setting for the whole thing. But in PPG2, many of these channels here can also accept an array of values. So for example, when we talk about rotate, I could do a random numbers or random value array with a range. That's this one here, go away. So, and plug it into a scalar to vector node and say, I just want to have the Z rotation here. And now I can plug it into the rotation and dial in some values. So minus 10 and plus 10 would be a nice value. So the size of it needs to be something. It can be huge. It can be in a lot of numbers. I can, of course, take the size of, I don't know how many groups we have here. So probably the size of this two-dimensional array, that's the number of groups that we have here. But you can just, create a whole number of random values. So now we can play around with the seed until we have a distribution that is random enough for me, and I can then even go PPG diagnostic, turn off the labels, turn off the pivots, and maybe even turn off the colors to properly see what it looks like. So this is a way to group things together. So transform is really a powerful node. If you use all of these possibilities of grouping things, like with cluster values and pattern rename, that is powerful. That's a strong thing here when you try to be all the way procedural and you can't select anything interactively. That's a really strong one. And this transform here that accepts arrays instead of single values for translate, rotate, scale. For the pivot position, you can use arrays. So that's a strong point here that you can use. Okay, so that was my tutorial for PPG transform in PPG 2.0 for Bifrost.